What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the definitive proof that you were chosen?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, think about that for a second. We spend our entire lives, you know, trying to avoid pain, trying to dodge failure and sickness and betrayal.
Right, it's just human nature.
Yeah. And when those things hit us, our instinct is to assume that something has gone terribly wrong.
Oh, absolutely. We always think we made a mistake somewhere.
But what if the fire you are sitting in right now is not an accident? What if it is a deliberate, calculated part of a massive design?
It just completely flips the script on how we perceive reality. I mean, we are so conditioned to interpret comfort as a blessing and, hardship as a curse.
Yeah, very true.
But when you start looking at the historical record and specifically at the theological bedrock of the Christian faith, well, that assumption falls apart very quickly.
It really does. Welcome to Reformed Thinking, everyone. This is the show where we take a stack of sources, books, articles, historical sermons, and we extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge from them.
Consider this your shortcut to being well-informed.
Yeah, we skip the fluff, we find the core truths, and we break them down for you. So today our primary source is a sermon delivered on August 12th, 1855.
It was preached by a young Charles Spurgeon in London.
Right, and it's titled God's People in the Furnace. He anchored this message in a very specific, very jarring text from the book of Isaiah, chapter 48, verse 10.
And to understand the weight of this material, you have to understand the context of 1855 London,
Set the scene for us a bit.
Well, Spurgeon was looking out at a religious culture that he considered wildly superficial. The 19th century church was very respectable. It was polite.
Right, high society stuff.
Yeah. He saw ministers who were entirely content to just scratch the topsoil of theology. They wanted to keep things light and easy and palatable for the upper crust.
They refused to plow deeper.
They really did. So Spurgeon's mission with this sermon was to dig past that soft topsoil and hit the solid, jagged rock beneath it. He wanted to uncover the massive, unyielding truths that actually hold up the gospel system.
And the verse he chose from Isaiah is definitely one of those jagged rocks. I mean, out of nowhere, God drops this massive statement.
Yeah, it's intense.
He says, I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction. Just let that hit you.
Yeah.
God is equating his sovereign choice with a literal furnace.
It's heavy.
It is. So as we unpack this today, I want to ask you, the listener, to actively evaluate your own life. When the bottom falls out, when your plans burn to the ground, how do you interpret that suffering?
Because Spurgeon argues that before we can find any comfort in the furnace, we have to tear down a massive misconception about what suffering actually does to a human being.
Yeah, let's look at that misconception.
Yeah.
Because it's the assumption that suffering automatically makes you a better person.
Right. People assume that if you are in the furnace, well, you must be chosen or you must be undergoing some kind of divine sanctification.
Like the sheet is fixing you.
Yeah, but Spurgeon attacks this idea head on. His first preliminary observation is that being in the furnace does not prove anything about your spiritual standing.
It's just a human thing.
Yeah, affliction is the common lot of humanity. I mean, the old proverb says that man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. Sparks go up regardless of who lit the fire.
I really need to push back on the modern cultural narrative here because our society just loves the idea that trauma creates empathy.
Oh, totally. It's a huge talking point today.
Right. We have this romanticized notion that surviving a tragedy automatically makes you more sympathetic or more grounded or, more righteous. We think the fire purifies everyone.
But Spurgeon brings a lot of practical realism to the table on this. He points out that crushing poverty happens to everyone.
It doesn't discriminate.
No, it doesn't. A person can live their entire life in destitute poverty, scraping by for their next meal, and remain entirely hostile to God, living in complete rebellion.
And the practical examples he uses are very grounding.
Yeah.
He talks about the agricultural realities of his day, like crop failure.
Yeah, the mildew and the blast.
Right. A farmer can do everything right, and then a blight of mildew or a blast of harsh weather destroys his entire livelihood overnight.
Just gone in an instant.
And that farmer might be a righteous man, or he might be a notorious scoundrel. The weather does not discriminate based on morality.
Same applies to financial ruin, A businessman can face total bankruptcy, losing every asset to his name, simply due to market forces.
And he even brings up slander, which is fascinating. We tend to think that if someone is being unfairly attacked in the press or, in their community, they must be a martyr for the truth.
Oh, yeah, we love an underdog.
We do.
No.
But corrupt politicians and wicked public figures have their characters dragged through the mud all the time. Trouble is just a universal currency. Everyone spends it.
And since trouble is universal, the suffering itself possesses no magical ability to produce righteousness. Trouble without saving grace is just pain.
Just pain.
Yeah. In fact, if God's grace is not active in a person's life, intense suffering usually hardens them. It makes them bitter and resentful and cynical.
The heat does not fix them. It breaks them down into something worse.
Yeah, and Spurgeon uses an analogy from the book of Exodus that just shatters this idea of automatic purification.
Oh, this is a great one.
He points to Aaron, the brother of Moses, and the whole incident with the golden calf.
Right.
So Moses is up on the mountain, the Israelites get restless, and Aaron just caves to their pressure. He collects all their gold jewelry, throws it into a fire, and fashions it into a pagan idol.
And when Moses comes down and demands an explanation, Aaron gives this incredibly weak excuse.
It's almost comical.
It is. He says, "Behold, I put gold into the furnace, and out of it came this calf."
It is the ultimate evasion of responsibility. Aaron is trying to blame the furnace for the idolatry.
He speaks as if the fire possessed some kind of creative autonomy, like the heat magically generated a pagan god all on its own.
But the reality is that the fire only allowed the idolatry that was already present in the hearts of the people and in Aaron's own cowardice to take a physical shape.
Yeah, the furnace didn't purify the camp of Israel. It just brought their latent rebellion right to the surface.
That is such a sharp diagnostic tool for our own lives, isn't it?
It really is. When the pressure is on, we like to say, "Oh, the stress made me do it," or "the grief made me act that way."
But the heat just accelerates what is already inside the material. If there is gold, it melts. If there is an idol, well, it takes shape.
And to reinforce how grim this reality can be, Spurgeon points to a terrifying passage in the 22nd chapter of Ezekiel.
Yeah, the imagery in Ezekiel 22 is sobering. The prophet describes God gathering the ungodly into the city of Jerusalem, framing the city as a massive furnace.
Right.
But God does not describe these people as precious metals waiting to be refined. He describes them as base metals: brass, tin, iron, and lead. Just a collection of industrial dross.
And the implication of those specific metals is heavy. You don't put lead and tin into a refining pot to make jewelry.
No, you don't.
You just melt them down for crude utilitarian purposes.
And the text makes the purpose very clear. God says he is gathering this dross into the furnace to blow the fire upon them, not to purify them, but to melt them in his fury and leave them there.
Man, in this scenario, the heat is entirely punitive. It is not redemptive in the slightest.
So for you listening right now, this is a massive reality check. We have to strip away the sentimental idea that your suffering is earning you points with the universe.
Suffering, absent of saving grace, is not a pathway to heaven.
Not at all.
For those who remain hostile to their Creator, earthly affliction is just a bitter foretaste of a much larger destruction. The furnace all by itself saves absolutely no one.
Which forces a massive pivot in the conversation. If the suffering itself is not the validating factor of a person's faith, then what is?
We have to look outside the furnace.
Right, we have to look at the anchor that holds the believer's soul steady before the fire is even lit. And that brings us to the core theological engine of this sermon.
God's immutable, unchanging election. The choice precedes the flames.
This is where we hit the bedrock Spurgeon was trying to get his congregation to stand on. God's choice is entirely sovereign, and it is completely unmerited.
Spurgeon lays out this sweeping, almost dizzying timeline of God's grace. He traces it chronologically, and it is worth breaking down step by step for the listener.
Where does he start?
He starts before creation itself, before you even had a physical being, when all of humanity was just an unformed concept in the mind of the Creator. God made a choice.
Out of that mass, he appointed you to eternal life.
Yeah. And then the timeline moves forward into the fall of humanity.
When the human race rebelled and fell into corruption, the Creator could have justly crushed the entire project. I mean, perfect justice would have required sending everyone to destruction.
Yet, looking at humanity in that ruined, fallen condition, he maintained his choice to provide redemption.
And the audacity of that grace continues right into the individual's lived experience. Think about your own life. God chose you as a sleeping infant.
You were entirely helpless, completely unaware of theology or the universe, unable to offer him any allegiance or good works.
And he chose you then. And he maintained that choice. Through the reckless foolishness of your youth, through all the terrible decisions and selfish ambitions.
Spurgeon goes even further. He says God chose you in adulthood, during periods when you might have been actively rebelling against him.
He watched over your path while you were a blind slave to your own desires, running madly toward your own ruin, perhaps even blaspheming his name.
It's wild to think about. He maintained his choice while you were sporting with death. The grace is not reactive to our goodness. It is proactive despite our hostility.
To be chastened at the very moment you were shaking your fist at the sky is a concept that just breaks human logic.
It really does. And then finally, there's the moment of redemption, the point in time where he actually speaks into your life, breaks the rebellion, and brings you in.
But even then, it doesn't stop. He maintains that choice even after you backslide. Even after you know the truth and still choose to ignore him, his choice holds firm.
Contrast that timeline with how human relationships operate. Think about the dynamics of your own friendships.
Right. Oh, human friendships are so fragile.
They are. If you have an associate who constantly ignores your calls, speaks poorly behind your back, undermines your goals, and runs away the second you experience a hardship, you sever that relationship. You drop them.
We call them summer friends. They stick around when the weather is warm, when the benefits are flowing, when the social capital is high.
But the second the winter of adversity hits, they vanish into thin air.
God is not a summer friend. He does not abandon the project when the conditions get harsh.
To capture the sheer weight of this steadfastness, Spurgeon leans on a poignant passage from the book of Isaiah.
The prophet asks, "Can a woman forget her sucking child that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb?"
It highlights the strongest biological and emotional bond in human existence, a nursing mother and her infant.
Yet the prophet acknowledges the brokenness of the world by adding, "Yea, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee."
Even the most fundamental human bond can fracture under enough pressure, but the sovereign choice of God cannot.
So bringing this back to the person sitting in the furnace right now, the implication is staggering.
If this chronology of grace is accurate, if God's love is this predetermined and constant, then the fire you are experiencing cannot scorch a single hair on your head without his permission.
The furnace is not a glitch in the system. It is not evidence that God fell asleep at the wheel or that his plan failed.
The furnace is a planned, intentional element of the covenant. The heat of the trial does not dictate the temperature of his love.
But, that sets up a massive tension, though.
It really does. And I want to unpack this contradiction. If God's love is so incredibly steadfast and his choice is so secure, why is the history of his people essentially a history of brutal, relentless trauma?
You would think a sovereign God would pave a smooth road for his favorites.
Right. But Spurgeon states very clearly that if you want to track the trail saints through human history, you just have to follow the smoke.
It is a dark irony, but historically accurate. You do not locate the saints by looking in the places of maximum comfort or earthly power. You locate them by finding the crucible.
Spurgeon provides a rapid-fire tour of biblical history to demonstrate this pattern, and it is worth dissecting these examples because they prove that suffering is the rule, not the exception.
Let's start at the very beginning of the human story with Abel.
He is the first man to truly worship God in a faith, bringing an acceptable sacrifice. And what is his reward?
He is lured into a field and murdered by his own brother.
The very first righteous man on earth leaves his blood crying out from the soil. The shock of that first murder must have been incomprehensible. Following God got him killed by his own family.
Then look at Noah. We often sanitize the story of Noah into a cute children's tale about animals, but consider the social furnace he endured.
Oh, the psychological pressure must have been immense.
He spent over a century building a massive maritime vessel on dry land, far from any ocean. The pressure of being mocked by an entire generation, hissed at as a lunatic, isolated from society while preaching a warning no one believed.
That is a furnace of social ostracization. Let's move to a national scale with the people of Israel. Where do you find God's chosen nation during the era of the pharaohs?
You don't find them lounging in the stately halls of Memphis or walking the grand avenues of the 100-gated city of Thebes.
They aren't rubbing shoulders with Egyptian nobility. You find them in the brick kilns.
Sweating under the brutal Egyptian sun, feeling the sting of the taskmaster's lash, being forced to hit impossible production quotas for bricks without being given the straw to make them.
Even after they're liberated from Egypt, the furnace follows them right into the wilderness. Take Joshua and Caleb.
Out of the 12 spies sent to scout the Promised Land, they were the only two who demonstrated genuine faith. They were the faithful remnant within the chosen nation.
And what was the immediate result of their faith? A mob of 2 million panicked, angry Israelites picked up stones, ready to crush them to death for telling the truth.
The pattern just accelerates from there. Look at David, a man famously described as being after God's own heart. Is he seated comfortably on a velvet throne during his prime years?
No, he is hunted like an animal. He is hiding in the damp, dark caves of En-Gedi, jumping at shadows, while a remorseless King Saul uses elite military units to track him down.
Look at the prophet Elijah, the man who called down fire from heaven. His daily reality was extreme isolation.
He lived in the wilderness, wrapped in a rough, shaggy garment, hiding by a drying brook, relying on ravens, which are unclean birds under the law, to drop scraps of meat and bread just so he wouldn't starve to death.
And this unbroken line of suffering doesn't stop when the Old Testament ends. The trail of the martyrs is literally scarred across the breast of the earth.
Spurgeon references the Maccabees in the intertestamental period, people who were tortured, flayed, and burned in unimaginable ways for refusing to assimilate into pagan culture.
He points to the early apostles. These were despised fishermen and tax collectors who were hunted down by the Roman Empire and executed.
The history of the true church leaves a blazing trail through the centuries, much like a comet flashing across a dark sky. The most permanent monuments of the church are not cathedrals.
They are the sepulchres of her martyrs.
This historical reality leads Spurgeon to make a biting observation about the institutional church of his own day, and it is highly relevant for us right now.
He argues that if he wanted to find authentic religion in 19th century London, the absolute last place he would look is inside some massive, glorious architectural marvel backed by state funding.
He says those places are decorated with the toys of Babylon. True faith is rarely discovered in the massive palaces of state-sponsored religion.
The core critique there is that when religion becomes fashionable, when it aligns with political power and societal comfort, it almost always loses its authenticity.
Historically, the most potent, genuine faith is found among the poor, the despised, the marginalized groups who have nothing to gain socially by following Christ.
It is found where the furnace blazes the hottest.
So if you are listening to this, you have to evaluate where you are looking for spiritual authenticity today. Do you instinctively look for it in the biggest, wealthiest, most heavily produced environments?
Or do you look for it where there is genuine cost, where adhering to the truth actually brings the heat of the furnace into someone's daily life?
Recognizing this historical pattern forces our brains to demand a reason. If we establish that the saints will suffer, we have to ask why the system is designed this way.
What is the divine logic behind the crucible? Why does a sovereign God insist on the fire?
Spurgeon lays out several rude reasons, and the first one reaches all the way back to the book of Genesis. He refers to the furnace as the stamp of the covenant.
The imagery here is massive. In Genesis 15, God is formalizing his covenant with Abraham. It happens during a terrifying scene in the dead of night. A thick, oppressive horror of darkness falls over Abraham.
The ritual taking place is an ancient Near Eastern treaty ceremony.
Typically, animals were cut in half, and both parties making the agreement would walk between the bloody pieces, essentially saying, "May this happen to me if I break my end of the deal."
But in this specific instance, Abraham is incapacitated. Only God moves between the pieces, taking the entire burden of the covenant upon himself.
But the symbols God uses to represent himself as he passes through the pieces are fascinating. The text says a burning lamp passed through, representing light, guidance, and truth.
But right alongside the lamp was a smoking furnace.
The legal stamp ratifying the document of God's promise inherently includes the furnace. You cannot extract the fire from the covenant without invalidating the whole agreement.
The smoking furnace is just as much a part of the contract as the burning lamp.
The second reason God designs it this way is to test value. Spurgeon points to the wisdom literature, specifically Proverbs 17.3, which states that the fining pot is for silver and the furnace is for gold.
Let's think about structural engineering for a second. If you're building a massive railway bridge designed to carry hundreds of tons of steel and human lives across a gorge, you do not use cheap, untested materials.
No way. You subject the load-bearing steel to immense stress in a laboratory. You apply pressure, heat, and tension to ensure it will not fail.
If you are just building a disposable plastic toy, you don't bother testing the material. The testing process is reserved for things that have high value and heavy responsibility.
Right, yeah. If you are just tin or cheap dross, you don't need the crucible. You are thrown into the furnace precisely because you are valuable in the eyes of God.
It is a strange, counterintuitive divine compliment. The trial proves the genuine worth of the material.
Another angle Spurgeon looks at is the concept of the living sacrifice. Under the Old Testament Levitical system, a sacrifice had to be processed by fire to be acceptable.
Even the offerings of grain, the green ears of corn, had to be dried and scorched with fire before they could be presented on the altar.
You could take a spotless lamb, kill it, and lay it on the wood, but it wasn't actually a sacrifice until the fire consumed it.
The New Testament calls believers to be living sacrifices. By definition, a sacrifice requires the application of fire. The furnace makes the offering acceptable.
And finally, the logic behind the crucible is the production of Christ-likeness. Spurgeon directs our attention to the massive, overwhelming vision of the ascended Christ in the first chapter of Revelation.
The Apostle John describes Christ in his glorified state, and he notes a very specific detail. Christ's feet were like fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
The theology of the Incarnation demands this. While his divine nature could not suffer, his human nature endured the ultimate furnace.
He experienced betrayal, physical torture, public humiliation, and the wrath of God on the cross. If the captain of our salvation, the very king we claim to follow, walked directly through the flames, why would we expect a detour?
It exposes the sheer entitlement of modern thinking. Why would we assume we deserve a smooth, paved, air-conditioned road when the Savior got the crucible?
The subjects of the king must expect to tread the exact same path the king walked.
Okay, so we've established the theology and the history, but let's get into the practical mechanics of this. What does the anvil and the fire actually yield in the daily life of a person?
What are the tangible benefits of surviving the heat?
The most immediate, visible benefit is purification. To illustrate this, Spurgeon shares an anecdote from a visit to a massive shipbuilding works in Glasgow, Scotland.
During the Industrial Revolution, these foundries were awe-inspiring places of intense heat and noise. He watched the workers cast massive metal components for the ships.
They took tons of raw, unrefined metal and dumped it into a gigantic crucible, subjecting it to blistering heat.
And as the metal melted down into a liquid state, a fascinating physical process occurred. All the impurities, the slag, the dirt, and the scum that were hidden inside the solid metal began to rise to the surface.
Once those impurities hit the surface, the workers could skim them off, leaving behind pure, structurally sound metal.
The critical insight here is that the scum never would have risen to the top without the application of intense heat.
It would have remained locked inside the solid metal, creating invisible stress fractures that would eventually cause the ship's component to fail under pressure at sea.
The furnace forces the hidden corruption into the light so it can be dealt with. Spurgeon compares this process to a surgeon's scalpel.
Now, 19th century surgery was a brutal, terrifying prospect, but if a patient has a fatal, malignant tumor growing inside them, they will voluntarily submit to the severe pain of the surgeon's knife.
They choose the lesser pain of surgery to eliminate the greater threat of the disease.
The furnace operates the same way on the human soul. It burns away the latent dross of pride, self-reliance, and hidden sin.
When a believer recognizes how fatal their own sin actually is, they begin to understand the necessity of the heat. They might not enjoy it, but they learn to value the purifying result of the fire.
The second major benefit is malleability. And here, Spurgeon uses the analogy of a blacksmith.
Imagine a blacksmith taking a piece of cold, rigid iron. He lays it on his anvil, picks up his heaviest hammer, and just starts wailing on it. He can hit that cold iron morning, noon, and night. What actually happens?
Very little. He might dent the surface slightly, or maybe chip the edges, but the iron remains fundamentally rigid.
The kinetic energy of the hammer alone cannot change the core structure of the metal. If he wants to reshape that iron, he has to place it into the forge.
He has to pump the bellows and apply intense heat until the iron glows red hot. The heat literally rearranges the molecular structure of the metal, making it fusible.
Once it reaches that state, the blacksmith can bend it, twist it, and shape it into whatever tool he desires.
Human nature is remarkably similar to that cold iron. We are naturally stubborn, stern, and rigid.
You can hit a person with the hammer of the law, you can threaten them with punishment, you can try to force moral compliance through strict rules, but those external blows will not fundamentally change their character.
They will just become a battered piece of cold iron.
But when God places a person into the furnace of severe affliction, the heat softens the internal disposition. It melts down the ego.
It dissolves the arrogant illusion that we are in control of our own destiny. Suddenly, that person becomes fusible.
They are ready to be poured into the mold of Christ's image. The trouble makes us moldable in the hands of the manufacturer.
A third, highly practical benefit of the furnace is illumination. Spurgeon draws a vivid picture from the manufacturing district of Birmingham.
If you looked at the sky above Birmingham at night during that era, the darkness was completely shattered by the intense, glowing glare of the industrial furnaces operating around the clock.
He applies that visual to how we interact with the Bible.
Hmm.
You can sit in a comfortable armchair, sipping coffee on a peaceful Tuesday morning, and read a difficult truth or a massive promise in Scripture, and you might get very little out of it.
It reads like abstract theological theory. Your brain comprehends the words, but they don't carry any weight.
But when your life falls apart, when you are thrust into the furnace of grief or severe anxiety, the glare of that fire casts a massive revealing light on the text.
Suddenly, you can spell out the hard words of the Bible. The promises take on a vivid, burning reality.
You see depths and nuances in the Scriptures that were completely invisible to you when you were comfortable. The fire provides the light necessary to read the map.
There is one more benefit, and it is honestly my favorite because it has this incredible, surprising boomerang effect. The furnace completely confounds the enemies of the gospel.
When the world tries to destroy God's people using the fire, it invariably backfires on the oppressors.
The biblical examples of this are striking. Think back to Moses in Egypt. In the book of Exodus, God commands Moses to take handfuls of ashes straight from the Egyptian furnace, the very symbol of their slavery, and throw those ashes into the air.
When he does, the ashes become fine dust that causes severe boils to break out on the Egyptians. The physical byproduct of the oppression became a plague on the oppressors.
But the most cinematic example of this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar is furious that these three men refuse to bow to his massive golden statue.
He loses his mind and orders the royal furnace to be shielded 7 times hotter than its normal operating temperature.
He commands the strongest, most elite soldiers in his army to bind the three men and throw them into the fire. But the physics of the furnace work against the king.
The heat radiating from the open door is so intensely lethal that it instantly incinerates the guards who are trying to throw the men in.
The fire destroys the enemies of God, while the three believers walk around unbound and completely unharmed in the middle of the flames.
Spurgeon actually experienced a version of this boomerang effect in his own life. He was constantly attacked and slandered by the secular press in London.
They mocked his preaching style, his appearance, his theology. But he realized that the intense heat of that slander was actually working in his favor.
He quoted an observation from Rowland Hill, an older preacher, who noted that malicious lies against believers tend to smell too much like a lie.
When the enemies of the truth heat the fire of slander too hot, the general public recognizes the malice and stops believing the accusations.
The overreaction exposes the lie. The slander just burns away the ropes of the believer's obscurity.
It elevates their profile and gives them a massively expanded platform to speak the truth from. You simply cannot win a fight against God's furnace. The heat always serves his purposes.
While understanding the mechanics of purification, malleability, and illumination is intellectually satisfying, theological explanations alone are often insufficient for a person who is currently weeping in the dark.
We need to pivot to the pastoral comfort Spurgeon extends to the listener who feels like they're burning up right now. How do you find actual rest while sitting in the flames?
Because the first comfort Spurgeon offers is the text of Isaiah itself. The very knowledge of your election acts like a suit of fireproof armor.
Think about the psychology of this. When severe poverty kicks in your front door and threatens your family, you can look at it and say, God is in this house already, and he has chosen me.
When a terrifying medical diagnosis knocks, you can say, God has chosen me.
It provides the immense comfort of knowing the final outcome is completely secure before the trial even runs its course. The heat of the circumstance has zero authority over the eternal state of the soul.
The second comfort he offers is much more intimate than just abstract theology. It is the reality of a divine visitor.
Spurgeon paints this vivid picture of a lonely, bare bedchamber. Imagine a miserable pallet, a cheap mattress on a cold floor in a 19th century tenement building where someone is suffering in total isolation.
They are forgotten by society, but Spurgeon points out that the Son of Man is a frequent visitor to such desolate places.
He suggests that Christ enters that lonely room, and simply by placing his hands on those bare, drafty walls, he consecrates the space. He turns a room of misery into a sanctuary.
The text says, he makes the bed in your affliction. He might bypass the grand palaces of kings and prime ministers, but he rushes to the lonely room of his suffering child.
The presence of that visitor changes the entire nature of the trial. You are not enduring the fire as an isolated victim. You are sharing the space with the Lord of life in glory.
It reminds me of a fascinating piece of history involving Julius Caesar. Caesar was attempting to cross the Adriatic Sea in a small, fragile boat, and a massive, violent storm blew in.
The boatman was completely terrified, convinced the vessel would shatter and they would both drown in the dark.
But Caesar, with absolute supreme confidence in his own destiny, looked at the man and said, "Fear not, thou carriest Caesar and all his fortune."
He was basically saying, the ocean cannot swallow this boat because I am in it and my story isn't over. Spurgeon applies that exact logic to the believer's union with Christ.
If you are a believer, you carry Jesus and all his immense fortune in your tiny, fragile boat.
The logic there is completely impenetrable. If Christ resides in you and you are thrust into the fire, then the fire is scorching him as well.
Whatever force attempts to destroy you would have to successfully destroy the Son of God first. And since he is indestructible, you are entirely safe.
You are a portion of his fullness, and he will never allow a portion of himself to be consumed.
That brings us to the final moments of this deep dive, and it is vital to note that Spurgeon does not end his sermon on a light, breezy note.
No. We have spent this entire hour analyzing the furnace of affliction on earth. But we have to address the solemn warning he issues regarding the other great furnace.
It is a sobering pivot. For all the intense pain of earthly affliction, it is strictly temporary, and for the believer, it is highly redemptive.
But Spurgeon points to a terrifying reality described throughout Scripture. A pile of fire and much wood, kindled by the breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone.
He is talking about the final judgment. He outlines the horrific reality for those who die godless and Christless, those who have spent their lives rejecting the grace we talked about earlier.
To die in that state means plunging into a vast, terrifying unknown, born irresistibly into a desperate land of torments.
It is an eternal furnace where the fire is not designed to purify, but to punish forever. The temporary earthly furnace prepares the believer for glory, but the eternal furnace is the culmination of divine justice against unrepentant rebellion.
Facing that reality, we have to present the singular door of escape. There is no human engineering that can save you from that fire.
There is only one way out, and it is faith in Jesus Christ.
Spurgeon breaks down the actual nature of this faith, stripping away a lot of religious confusion. He uses a term from an old theologian, recumbency.
Recumbency. It is such an archaic, almost clunky word, but the visual it provides is perfect. It simply means lying down.
It means taking the full weight of your body and resting it on an external structure. Spurgeon offers three incredibly simple, evocative visuals to explain how this works.
First, he says it is like a child resting completely in a mother's arms, exerting zero effort to hold itself up.
Second, it is like a seaman out on the deep ocean, trusting his entire life to the structural integrity of the wooden hull of his ship.
He isn't trying to hold the ship together, he's just riding in it.
And third, he compares it to an old, frail man, leaning his entire physical weight heavily upon a wooden staff.
That is the core definition of saving faith. It is not an active, frantic striving to save yourself.
It isn't a frenzy of moral improvement. It is a passive, total reliance on the finished work of Christ. It is allowing his massive strength to hold you up entirely.
You venture wholly on him, refusing to let any other trust intrude.
Which is incredibly difficult for the human ego to accept. We want to contribute to our rescue. We want to hold on to some illusion of control.
But recumbency requires letting go of control completely.
So as we close the book on this sermon, we want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on this week.
If faith is simply leaning your entire weight on Christ, are you currently exhausting yourself trying to walk through your personal fire on your own strength?
Are you desperately trying to manage the flames, fix all the impossible problems, and carry the crushing burden entirely by yourself?
Or are you finally ready to stop swinging the hammer at cold iron, stop fighting the heat, lie down, and let him carry you through the smoke?
It is a question that demands total honesty about where your trust truly resides when the temperature in your life spikes. Think about that as you face whatever furnace is burning in your life right now. Thanks for joining us on Reformed Thinking. We will see you next time.